And we are live.
Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the joint meeting of the Zoning Advisory Committee and the Conservation Advisory Council for the town of East Greenbush. Supervisor, if I could turn it over to you for a welcome.
Yeah, this is the beginning of an effort that's very, very important to the future of our town. The zoning map is the basis of what gets developed, what doesn't get developed, how things go, what's allowed in various parts of town. There's really nothing more important to the planning and development of the town of East Greenbush than the zoning map. It was last updated 14 years ago, and we've been inundated with planned development district applications, which mean those are rezones, which means that the zoning map at some level is obsolete. It isn't working. We're getting the most ridiculous proposals in residential buffers, starting with a casino, which was proposed for a residential buffer zone. So we've got to get this right. This is a critical time for the town of East Greenbush. Regeneron is getting bigger and bigger and bearing down on us. People don't want to lose this town into something else, but the only way that we can march into the future in a planned, rational way is to create the correct framework with an amended zoning map. As I said to these guys before we came on, it's an incredibly important and yet incredibly boring task that has to be undertaken here, because this is dry stuff, but it takes a lot of work to master it and to understand to the point where we can come up with ideas for what the future should look like. We have a great team, Jackie Hakes, Andres, and Sophia. We've worked with these people. They've done great work with us. They are the most user-friendly team that I have ever worked with. So I thank everybody for coming, everyone who's going to do the work, everyone who's interested. I thank the Conservation Advisory Council for being here. This is really important, and you guys are rocking and rolling. So we're very proud of the work that you've done. So we've got all the things we need here. We hope the public tunes in. We hope we get feedback, but we're off and run. I was going to say we're off and running, but what we're really doing is we're off and crawling, because this is going to be hard work. So I make no bones about it, but I thank everybody for participating. Let's get it right.
Great. Thank you, Supervisor. We appreciate that. And with that, we are going to do a roll call. As I mentioned, this is a joint meeting with the Conservation Advisory Council and the Zoning Advisory Committee. And it is the first meeting of the Zoning Advisory Committee. Just to help everybody understand who's here, I will do a brief roll call for the CAC first. And so when I call your name, if you can, please just indicate that you're here, and we'll make sure that there's a quorum. And then we'll go ahead and get into the heart of our meeting tonight. So first, Victoria.
Present.
Adam.
Here.
Fred.
Present.
Jennifer.
Present.
I'm sorry, Jennifer Dean, and then.
Oh, Jennifer Dean is present.
Okay, and then Jennifer Hickson.
Here.
Thank you. All right. And then moving on to our Zoning Advisory Committee, Supervisor Conway.
Present.
Tina.
Present.
Josh.
Present.
Matt.
Present.
Jeff.
Here.
And there will be an assigned CAC member to the Zoning Advisory Committee, and that will be to determined. to be determined. I also want to identify the town staff that have been invaluable as we've moved from the comprehensive planning process and now are shifting into the zoning process. Adam
Here.
and Anna. And as the supervisor indicated, our team is here to support you throughout this process. And Jackie Hakes, I will be serving as the project manager for this. Our project planner is Andres Blumbergs, and joining us from Plan and Site Consulting is Sophia Maruso to bring years of experience in zoning to the team. So that's who we have with us this evening. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Our agenda for this evening is before we get too far in, to have a little more of an introduction. So I will be asking for everybody to share a little bit more about themselves. We will be providing an overview of the comprehensive planning process. It is important to understand how we got to this point now and what is guiding us moving forward. We'll provide an overview of the update process we are about to embark on with the zoning and subdivision regulations. And then we will dive into a discussion of proposed zoning districts and a proposed zoning map. If we have time, we'll talk a little bit about the definitions in your zoning, any challenges or changes that you'd like to see. We'll talk about next steps. And then I do want to point out that we will have an opportunity for public comment at the end of the discussion. So for those members of the public joining us, thank you. And we will have an opportunity for you to comment. I'll share with you in just a moment how you can go about doing that. And I do want to thank everybody for your flexibility and kind of the last minute pivot from what we intended to be a work session in person to a virtual meeting. So we will be working out some of the kinks as we move forward should we need to continue in a virtual setting. So before I move into the webinar how-to, I would like to go around the Zoom room, so to speak, and ask each of the committee members, whether you're a Conservation Advisory Committee member or a Zoning Advisory Committee member, to just introduce yourself, who you represent, and identify 1 to 2 key priorities that you would like to see for this zoning update. And you know, for the sake of time, if you can try to keep that brief, that would be wonderful. So again, who you represent, what hat you're wearing. I'm sure many of you wear multiple hats, but the hat you're wearing tonight. And then 1 to 2 key priorities that you would like to see through the zoning update. So I'm just going to go around the room as it's showing on my computer screen. So I'm going to start with Victoria.
Let me unmute myself. Hello.
Hello.
Hope everyone is doing well tonight. I'm Victoria Manieri, and I am on the Conservation Advisory Council. I also had the wonderful opportunity to work with many of you in the past on the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee. So I'm excited to see this next step in the whole process. Coming from the Conservation Advisory Council, I am definitely looking at, like, during the zoning process to make sure that those updates correspond with some of the things that we discussed in the coming out of the comprehensive plan, in focusing any of a new development and growth into certain areas and restricting that growth, kind of preserving the eastern side of town and preserving as much of the natural space and the natural resources that we have in town as well.
Thank you, Victoria. Okay, Matt, you are next on my screen.
Matt Maston, I guess the only Matt. So I have been involved in the town since 2007. I was a summer help employee for the water department, changing out water mains. So that was fun. And then I was hired in the planning office in 2009, left in that job in 2012, and I've been on the planning board since January of 2012. In the past few years, I've been the chairman of the planning board. And I guess my main goal is, how do we develop in a logical and a smart way that accommodates both the town, I don't know, the town and we have to work with developers and the town, right? And try to find out some happy medium there, I think. So that is my goal.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Okay, Adam, Toby.
Hello, I'm Adam Toby. So I'm a representative of the Conservation Advisory Council. I am a graduate of UAlbany's Master of Regional Planning program, so I'm coming at this from more of a technical standpoint to try and get a broader understanding of the way that the Conservation Advisory Council can implement some of what they want in a more grounded way, in a way that's focused within the policies.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Jennifer Dean.
Hi, good evening. So I'm the chair for the Conservation Advisory Council, and I'm a resident here, which I guess most people are. Let's see, I helped out with the natural resources inventory a couple years ago, one of the initiatives that Victoria led, and really gave me a good sense of the natural resources that our town does have. And yeah, just trying to, I have a background in environmental sciences, entomology, botany, and trying to help apply that scientific background to some of the challenges and the growth of the town to best help keep the green space that we do have functional. So like wetlands as sponges, forests as buffers, wildlife corridors, and so forth. So working with development to keep that green space functional, that's one of my top priorities. And then another priority is increasing the connectiveness of the different areas of town for non-motorized transportation. So making a more walkable and bikeable town and connecting all those different corridors, I think would make this place a very attractive place for people to live.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Fred.
Unmute myself. My name is Fred Henson. I've been an East Greenbush town resident since 2011. My professional, and I serve on the Conservation Advisory Council. My professional background is in fisheries biology, so a technical background. I grew up on Long Island, and I saw a lot of the a part of the state that came under intense development pressure, and I saw a lot of things that happened that were very regrettable, and other decisions that were good. So I guess my personal objective for this effort, I would summarize in saying that I want in 2 or 3 generations from now, East Greenbush residents to feel like we didn't screw up the town, and that we're transmitting to them the things that of greatest unique value in being a resident of East Greenbush. So that's my motivation.
Okay, thank you, Fred. Jeff, you are next.
Hey, Jackie. Jeff Pangburn, chairman of the zoning board, but tonight member of the zoning advisory committee. So I've been living with the comprehensive zoning law for the past, I think, 9 years or so. Been volunteering with the town since about 2003, I believe it was, but lifelong resident, did live in Austin for a couple of years and Troy for a while, but this is my hometown, so I've seen it grow. I grew up biking the streets, grew up almost getting run over on 9 and 20 as a pedestrian. So I feel the Complete Streets push helped install the first 2 roundabouts and only roundabouts in town, sidewalk on Luther Road. So I feel the connectivity of pedestrian and bicycle needs, pushed hard to see Temple Lane move to fruition and long-range planning. So the big push I see, I agree with Victoria. I'd love to see good development being pursued in the town where it makes sense. We have, a very diverse habitat, and we go from the river all the way out to the forest in the eastern part of the town and everything in between, with an interstate cutting through the middle. So we've got a lot of opportunity, a lot of growth potential, good growth potential. We have a need for senior housing. I feel it personally. My mom still lives in town trying to find a spot. I live in a neighborhood that's under immense pricing pressure right now. That's insane what houses are going for. So we've got to find a way to create some housing stock that people can afford in the town, and where does it make sense and make it livable. And as Jennifer mentioned, make things stitch together well so we don't have to drive to everything. But also recognizing that people do have cars, and we do need to address that. So looking forward to this. I agree. It's an important initiative. So glad to be a part.
I'm glad you mentioned your mom, Jeff. You're too young to be looking for senior housing.
Yeah. Actually, with some of our developers, I'm not too far away. So we're going to work on that definition too.
We'll make a note of that.
There you go. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Jeff. Josh, you are next, please.
Thanks, Jackie. Josh Wayman. I am a resident of the town of East Greenbush. I also own and operate a commercial construction company in the town. I am most interested in, obviously, sustainable growth within the town of East Greenbush, promoting growth, whether it be in the commercial, residential sector, but also preserving the natural elements of the town, which have made it so attractive for people to move here over the years. So I'm very happy to be a part of the group, and looking forward to being, a part of the change.
Great. Thank you, Josh. Jennifer Hickson.
Hello. I was born in East Greenbush 100 years ago, and was away for a long time. And when I came back, I was happy to see that a lot of what I remembered was still in place. I'm a member of the CAC. I also worked on the NRI. And I'm doing this because I feel that it's my job to work to preserve the things that I care about, which are open space, sensitive habitats, and agricultural lifestyle. Partly because I think those contribute to everyone's benefit. They contribute to the common good in air quality and water quality, and exposure to nature, which has been shown to be beneficial to people's mental health. And so one of my goals is to make it easier for people to have recreational opportunities in our open spaces.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, Tina.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tina Tierney from the East Greenbush Town Board. I'm very happy to be here with such a great group. Thank you to everyone for joining us. Goals are to have a thoughtful, explainable, defensible, sustainable process and map that this is one of the more impactful undertakings that we're taking on as the town board, and we have the right people to do it. So thank you, everyone.
Great. Okay, Jack, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Yeah, I'm Jack Conway, and I wake up every single day hoping I represent all 16,600 people who live in the town of East Greenbush. The reason this is so important to me is we have done over my 6 years a number of initiatives that are really important. We did a natural resource inventory. We emphasized complete streets. We formed a conservation advisory council. We did a new comprehensive plan, and the zoning map is the next logical step in all of what we've done. But there are two things that I just would say about this plan. First off, there's going to be no politics, none, for the first time in the history of the town of East Greenbush, a zoning map will be amended for other than political reasons. But having said that, because we have emphasized conservation, and the comprehensive plan is pretty firm on that issue, I also think this group, we need to have a session in which the development community in East Greenbush is heard. You know, let's bring in a bunch of people. Let's talk to people and find out what they're thinking. Because what we're looking for from the comprehensive plan is smart growth in the western part of town, conservation in the eastern part of town. So where you put things is really important. But I will say this again, this is my 7th year as town supervisor, and I have not once knowingly let politics into the work that we do as a town. And it for damn sure isn't starting here. We're going for the right answer. There's no preconceived notions. There's no special interest other than the welfare of the town and the public interest. So I'll get off the soapbox, but I'm not kidding. There will be no politics.
Thank you, Jack. And Adam and Anna, from a staff perspective, what are the top 1 to 2 priorities that you would like to see as a result of the zoning update?
Thanks, Jackie, and thank you, everybody. I'll start quickly. My name is Adam Yagelski. I'm the Director of Planning and Zoning for East Greenbush. I think from the staff perspective, we have an opportunity here to integrate a number of different threads of activity. The town is undertaking, a major infrastructure upgrade right now. We have the NRI, we have the new comprehensive plan. We're going to also be looking at the route, doing some corridor, smaller area planning on Route 4. So the zoning map is related to, integral to, influences, and is influenced by all of those activities. So that's one thing. And I think the other, and making sure that those pieces fit together, as Jack said, in the right way. And I think the second thing is, Anna and I use this, and Matt and Jeff use the zoning map and the zoning each day. And we have a lot of experience with it. I would like to say we know some of the things that work, and some of the things maybe more pointedly that aren't working with the code. And we definitely bring that detailed perspective and look forward to making those adjustments or maybe some of those whole scale changes to make it really also usable and I should also say for the development community, and also for the residents who come in, looking for, to install a shed or do many apartment units or what have you. So it needs to be usable for a variety of people. And I think we've got some of those folks represented here. And so in any event, that's Anna. Do you have anything? Let me kick it to Anna.
Well, you covered most of it. I was going to emphasize the usability part as well. And to Tina's point earlier, discussing the process as a whole as defensible and accessible, but obviously the finished code itself too, to have something that's easy for us to understand, easy for all different types of users to understand, and that does incorporate all those previous updates that Jack and everyone else has mentioned.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, everybody. I do appreciate your thoughts, and since this is the first time we're all together, appreciate your willingness to take a little more time just to introduce ourselves. It helps us to understand the perspective that everybody has with regard to the zoning update. So moving on, I do want to just let members of the public that are joining us, and we are getting some Q&A in on the Zoom Q&A now, and we will get to that. at the end of the session today. So following the work of this joint meeting of the committees, we will be providing an opportunity for public comment and questions. I'll review this again when we do get to that point, but you can utilize the Q&A function. We'll work through that. You can also use the raise the hand feature when we get to the end of the meeting. And if you are on the telephone and it doesn't look like anybody is today, oh yeah, there is one call-in listener today. You can press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute and speak. So again, I will be going through this when we do get to that point. Following the meeting, at this point, you can submit comments and questions to the planning office. We will be developing a zoning update website where it will be kind of your one-stop shop for information about this process and to be able to provide comment in an ongoing manner that's currently in progress. All right. So moving on to the next piece of the agenda this evening. As I mentioned before, I think many of you are very familiar with the comprehensive planning process and the effort that the town undertook. But I think it's important for us to recap that and refresh our memories of what was discussed and how that was arrived at, because it is the foundation and does provide the direction for what we're about to embark on. And so it was a consensus-based, community-driven process. There was a substantial amount of public engagement, everything from open houses and workshops. Back when we could be in person, we had very well-attended workshops at the Red Barn. We had an online survey with over 780 responses. We had a chance to engage with students. We had a variety of stakeholder group meetings. There was a web presence through the town website, e-newsletters, and then the public hearings, both at the committee level and the town board level. There was also an evaluation of existing conditions through the community profile and technical memorandums that dug a little deeper into different topic areas to understand what those existing conditions are. There was committee meetings, a series of committee meetings for the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee. And then ultimately the plan was adopted by the town board this last May. The comprehensive plan includes multiple sections, including a vision and a set of guiding principles. And that vision was really kind of providing that guidance for the development of the comprehensive plan. The sections of the plan are focused on those guiding principles. And there's also a future land use section and an implementation section, and we're going to talk about those in a little more detail. There is a series of appendices which support the comprehensive plan. And I point these out only to highlight that these can be utilized as resources if necessary as we're going through this process. And these can be along with any other resources that you might need to be making decisions as we go through the zoning process. Let us know, and we'll find those and provide those to you. So here's the vision that is in your adopted comprehensive plan. I'm not going to read this, but I just want you to, every once in a while, as we're going through this process, maybe refresh your memory of what this vision is so that we don't lose sight of that while we're getting into the details. And this will be an effort in minutia, working through the details of the zoning update. But sometimes it's helpful to take a step back and remember what we are trying to accomplish with these land use policies as we are revising, reshaping, and perhaps introducing new policies through your zoning. I mentioned a set of guiding principles within your comprehensive plan. These are guiding principles that were identified with the hopes of trying to help the town achieve that vision. There's placemaking, transportation and mobility, economic growth, neighborhoods and housing, recreation, natural resources, agriculture and the environment, and then government and infrastructure. And within your comprehensive plan, each of these guiding principles has an overview and a description of what the intent is, a set of goals and recommendations. And I point this out because in some instances, these recommendations do address or do impact the zoning. And so we need to take a look at what was recommended in the comprehensive plan and make sure that that is consistent with the zoning effort as we move forward. One of the most critical elements of the comprehensive plan for our purposes in this zoning update is the future land use. And that section of the zoning and the discussion of that really does set the future for land use regulations, including your zoning and subdivision regulations. Within the comprehensive plan, this is not intended to be zoning, but it is going to be the basis for which we are talking about possibly proposed new zoning districts and the location of those proposed zoning districts. I do want to point out, and I'm going to talk about this in a little more detail as we set up that discussion about the proposed districts and the map. But the high level concept behind this future land use map in your comprehensive plan is that the most intense and greatest mix of uses are in what we call key activity centers and corridors. So think Columbia Turnpike, think Route 4. And then that allows for the protection of environmental resources and open spaces in the more rural, undeveloped areas of the community. And so, like I said, we'll talk a little bit more detail about that in just a moment. And then ultimately, your comprehensive plan does have a set of implementation steps, and that's how you actually move forward with your comprehensive plan. And the priority recommendation is to evaluate your zoning for consistency with the comprehensive plan. And I do want to point out that's not only just a good idea, it is within town law that your land use regulations must be in accordance with your comprehensive plan. So I know Tina and Anna had mentioned something defensible. This is that defensible piece. We need to make sure that that direct correlation from your adopted comprehensive plan to your zoning. All right. So how are we going to do this? I hope we haven't scared you away. It looks like all of our committee members are still with us, so thank you for that. We are going to do this first by establishing this committee. Again, thank you for your willingness to do this. This is going to be a technical committee, in case you haven't already gotten that idea. We will be getting into the details of what I'm calling broadly land use policy. So that's your zoning and your subdivision regulations. We will be having regular meetings that will be work sessions. With the exception of this evening, the intent is to be providing you materials in advance of our meetings so that when we come together, we can just dive in to the material in front of you. And we will talk about, how frequently we need to meet, if a monthly basis is something that works for everybody, and we'll work to get a regular schedule in place. Our team has initiated a zoning diagnostic table. So this is a table that includes, as of right now, an evaluation of the existing zoning with the comprehensive plan recommendations, identifying what might need to change as a result of your adopted plan, as well as town staff input. We hope to be adding to that with input from this committee as well as from the community. And this is our guide for updating the zoning and to track the changes. There's a lot of moving parts going on with this, so we want to make sure that we're tracking all of that. I did mention your subdivision regulations update. This will happen, but it'll happen a little bit later on in the process. We're really going to focus on the zoning first, and then take a look at the zoning regulations, because some of what might end up in the zoning might help to influence and guide some of the subdivision regulation updates. Jack mentioned earlier, hearing specifically from the development community. There might be other target areas that we want to hear specific input on. So there will be a public engagement component to this that will likely involve focus group meetings in addition to public hearings and or workshops. The format and the platform for this type of engagement is really going to be dependent on what questions we need to ask of the community and get feedback from. And it is different than the engagement of the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan was much broader, higher level. This is going to be very targeted and specific. So just keep that in mind, members of the public that are joining us, we appreciate that. It will be a little bit of a different type of feel than the engagement from the comprehensive plan. So just as a quick, peek behind the curtain, we just wanted to show you, this is, just a quick screen share of the zoning diagnostic. I don't expect you to be able to read all of this, but if you can follow my cursor, we've identified kind of the source of information here, what the comment might be. So this top part are, this is our evaluation of the comp plan. Specific recommendations related to the comp plan, where they are in the comprehensive plan and what needs to be done. Next steps will be looking to identify what zoning code sections are most appropriate for these changes to be integrated into. And we have identified, the status, who from our team is going to be tackling that and responsible for those modifications. Similarly, we've started to get input from Adam and Anna. Thank you very much, as well as, Jeff. I want to thank you. During the comprehensive plan process, we got some input from the zoning board as well, and that we have tracked, just so that you know, that's something that we've also kept. And so we've identified some of those specific comments and edits and where those will need to be updated in what section of the zoning. So this is how we're tracking internally, kind of how we want to do this. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to break this down into manageable bites, if you will, that we can reasonably tackle, address, and then move on to the next section. Your existing zoning includes four sections and then multiple subsections within those sections. We are going to start primarily by utilizing your current zoning, your existing zoning format, kind of working within that. If there is a need to modify that from a usability standpoint, we will. But that's something that we would want to hear from you as a committee, and identify that. At this point, we are starting with your existing zoning, and we will work methodically through each section, okay, so that we make sure nothing is left behind. So we are doing an entire zoning update. Some zoning updates are just targeted on, one or two areas or 3 or 4 areas. We are looking comprehensively at your entire zoning. It's been some time, so it's definitely time to kind of take that comprehensive look of your zoning. So the sections of your current zoning are the purpose and scope. That's really not going to change a whole lot. So that is something that we will probably leave till, toward the end, when we've gotten through all the hard stuff, for lack of better term. But we will be looking at that. So we are diving into section 2 first, which is the zoning districts. Okay, and then we'll move on to the townwide standards. That's where your zoning and that's where your signage and parking regulations reside. That's where some of your details about design, performance standards, etc. They live in section 3 of your zoning. Then we'll move on to section 4, which is the general administration kind of procedural type of things. So our initial sections that we're just jumping right in with you all. We're focusing on the proposed zoning districts, where those zoning districts fall on your zoning map. We're focusing in on definitions, area and bulk standards, and your use schedule. So we are just jumping right in. And I think what's important about that and why we want to do that is that these are probably some of the bigger discussions that we are going to have. And it sets the basis for the rest of the discussions related to your zoning. Okay, so it's important. We feel that we start here. I do want to point out, though, and I didn't put it on the slide, there might be other topics that come up throughout this process that we need to kind of jump ahead, jump ahead of the queue, so to speak, in terms of having this committee address and evaluate things like solar, for example, or if there are other particular topics that come up that we might need to really focus on in a more timely fashion, we certainly can do that. So, while we kind of have an approach mapped out, we can certainly be flexible as the town needs as we're moving through this. Okay. All right. So moving on, here we are. We're going to dive in tonight to the zoning districts and the proposed zoning map. We are going to do a quick overview of your existing zoning districts and maps. And then I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the future land use map from your comprehensive plan. As I mentioned, that does set the stage for our discussion about your proposed zoning districts and proposed map. And that's really going to be the heart of what we want to hear initial feedback from you on tonight. So here's your existing zoning map. So there are, I believe, 15 zoning districts now. You can see, you know, a wide range of districts kind of along Columbia Turnpike and along Route 4. There are multiple residential districts and multiple office districts that exist right now within your community. And so one of the things that Sophia is going to talk a little bit about in our proposed districts and proposed map is that we're kind of looking to simplify that as best we can for a variety of reasons. And so Sophia is going to talk a little bit more about that. This should look familiar to everybody that's on this, you know, on our joint meeting this evening. I'm sure you utilize this, you've worked with this, you're familiar with this. We are probably going to shake it up a little bit as we move forward through this process. And here's the future land use map. So I do want to take a little bit of time if you can you know, give me that chance to walk through this future land use map a little bit more. As I mentioned before, the intention here is to really focus the most intensive uses in key areas within the town to allow for some of that growth to happen while still conserving or preserving the open space and some of the natural areas in the community. So trying to find that balance. So the most intense uses in the future land use map, which aren't necessarily, it's not necessarily that different from your existing zoning map, but there are some key changes here. And most intensive uses between hold on, I'm going to annotate here and just give me a moment. All right, so hopefully you can see this little red dot. So most intensive uses between Columbia Turnpike and I-90. So this section of the town, with the less intensive uses happening as you travel to the west and out to your east, okay? Some of the key features of the future land use map are activity centers or nodes. The primary activity center is the intersection here of Route 4 and Columbia Turnpike. The intent there is to really have you know, higher intensity mix of commercial, retail, higher density residential and office in a compact, walkable area, and trying to look at opportunities for transit and multimodal transportation here. Following those primary activity centers are 5 secondary nodes or activity centers. So those are indicated by these yellow circles here. So the first one is the Heights. The next one is the Phillips Road. Next is the East Greenbush Hamlet Center. This is kind of that historic Hamlet area. The next up is the Couse Corners, and then the East Greenbush Commons. This is kind of that more regional node, if you will. Hold on, I gotta switch my notes here. So the next item in terms of the future land use is really looking at neighborhood mixed use. So this is that lighter pink area around the YMCA and the library just off of Route 4, and that area kind of along the Route 4 corridor as you're coming south to Columbia Turnpike. So this also is intended to have some mix of uses, but it's intended to be less dense than some of the other areas and less intense than some of the areas of town. We then have the commercial mixed use, which is this kind of brighter purple pink area, and that is located along Columbia Turnpike. And the intent of that is really to also allow for a variety of mixed uses, focusing mostly on commercial with some residential, because there's some residential that exists there, but creating the connectivity between the nodes. and what that might be best. It might be trail connectivity, it might be sidewalk. And what we're doing within this area, as well as within those nodes and activity centers, the comprehensive plan introduces concepts like design guidelines or form-based code as tools to be able to shape the development that's happening there. We also have what's called the NR, which is the neighborhood residential. Some of this was, you might have recognized as currently your residential buffer district that's part of that. The idea here is to be a more high or moderate density residential with community supported commercial uses. So, and again, creating that connectivity within these areas and within these neighborhoods. But to keep that neighborhood feel and scale, that's kind of the key here. Next is the residential transition. Also, some of those areas where your residential buffer zoning exists now. So that includes kind of a more low to moderate type of residential uses there, and does create that transition between the lower density areas and that neighborhood residential. We then have the office commercial, which is this area here. And that's intended to be areas that have pre-existing, what we would call suburban style office and commercial type of development, and allowing that to continue because there are active active uses there. Then there's the regional commercial proposed land use, which should be rather obvious, but it's that a more auto-oriented type of development up near 3rd Ave Extension, the northern part of Route 4 within the town. There's an education land use category, pretty obvious where we're looking. This is the school and down here as well. There is the rural low density residential. That's in the large portion of the east area of the town. And then it's proposed from a land use perspective to be the area, I'm going to say east of River Road. And this is one of those changes, this rural residential and the neighborhood residential here, where we really looked at what the existing conditions are of your environment. The natural resources inventory came into play and was really helpful for the discussion about this. There are steep slopes, there are a lot of environmental constraints here. So looking at matching the proposed or future land use as discussed in the comprehensive plan with the reality of what's on the ground and what exists and what might be possible there. We then have, as a future land use, introduced something a little different in the comprehensive plan than what the town has now, and that's the research, design, and technology future land use. So that is recognizing that these land uses are happening and they are growing within the community. So embracing those from a future land use and through the zoning, helping to shape that. So that's the UAlbany area here. That's the Regeneron area here, okay. And then the light industrial area. So that is an area proposed from a future land use perspective along River Road. So it's kind of this long corridor area here. The waterfront industrial, that is, from a future land use, pretty consistent with what exists now in your zoning, as well as your current land uses. And then the agricultural open space future land use down by the preserve and along the waterfront. Okay. So that was a lot that I just went through from a future land use, and I went through it quickly, but hopefully everybody's had a chance to review the comp plan. And if you have questions, we certainly can help answer that. But what I'm going to do now is to turn this over to Sophia. And Sophia's going to walk through how we've gotten from that to a proposed set of zoning districts and a proposed zoning map. And then we're going to have some conversation with you. And we're going to stop talking for a little bit. Okay. Sophia, take it away.
Great. Well, Jackie, I can't promise I'm not going to talk for a short period of time. I'm very hard. to tone back once I get started, I just want to say thank you so much for inviting me to the table, so to speak. It's been a total treat being able to work with Jackie and Andres and to work for the common mission of this committee. I think this is incredible and exciting work that you're undertaking, although it's been properly, I believe, noticed that it can sometimes be dry. Thank you, Supervisor Conway, for that very honest discussion over that. It's true, but the devil's in the details, and that's why we're excited to get into it. So to set a little context in terms of, delivering our first actionable piece for us to digest on tonight, which is going to be the proposed zoning district map. As you can tell, one of the things that we wanted to identify were what were the key takeaways that we needed from this new map and how it needed to function. So as we were kind of looking from the outside in, there were a couple of things that we noticed that we thought might be better supported through the revision of this map. So there were a couple critical objectives that were applied when considering how to take the existing zoning map, the future land use map, and kind of rectifying the two to create this third and kind of unknown product. So the first piece from a perspective that both Anna and Adam had indicated before was really thinking about looking at this future zoning map to be simplified and to improve the ease of use. Whether you're a resident, you're a planner, you're a business owner, you're a representative on a land use or legislative board, being able to readily work through your zoning material and being able to educate others or yourself easily and without a lot of contention or room for interpretation is kind of paramount to being able to execute a code to your vision. So one of the things that we wanted to do is to look at the new proposed zoning map and say, what ways can we consolidate and simplify the zoning map to still maintain its functionality, but get a little bit kind of dialed into the message here and really think about these different and distinct zoning district and neighborhoods that we're creating as a result of organizing that space. So consolidating and simplifying those districts became a priority. If you look over at the table, you can see stacked up as Jackie had indicated, we're looking at, having currently 50 would be a lot, 15 zoning districts, which includes kind of the catch-all PDD of which you have multiple, obviously, and bringing that down and distilling it just over slightly, but down to 13 districts, which would still include the different PDD component. Part of what we were wanting to do is trying to kind of organize these in a fashion that says, okay, are there any ways that we can just kind of take this down and really distill it so that we don't have either duplications or potential conflicts between uses in certain zones that might be existing in others, and we might have a hard time kind of interpreting where those uses fall into. I think we really want to try to remove as much of that ambiguity as possible. So distilling those districts down into the new proposed. So the list of zoning districts that you see here nearly verbatim match the language indicated in the future land use map, which, as you're well aware and you already suspect, we're so early on in the process, has a ton of room for creative application in terms of renaming, rebranding, whatever it may be. I think distilling our language and really figuring out what we're trying to communicate here will be really municipally specific. And that's where having that local understanding and having, understanding that local context is going to be kind of invaluable from a perspective of counting on the committee members. And this is a great place to kind of chew on that. So what you see here is we've gone from 7 to 3 residential zones, again, for the purpose of trying to kind of distill between generally low density, rural, high intensity, and then kind of a neighborhood or suburban scale residential component. The other piece that we tended to see kind of a duplication of were the commercial and the industrial uses. Again, with the existing zoning districts, we have a general business, mixed use, general business, corporate office, regional commercial, corporate office, light industrial. We wanted to take a lot of that and just see if we could just, again, consolidate it for the purposes of organizing our document a little bit more clearly, being able to read our map a little bit more clearly. And so what you see here instead is kind of a removal of some of those into office commercial, regional commercial, research design, technology, and then the 2 different industrial components. The other main difference that we see here, in addition, and it kind of accompanies the process of consolidating the residential uses, is that we also see an introduction of distinctly neighborhood scale uses. So as Jackie had indicated before, there's already obviously very well-established neighborhoods that have already kind of a committed institutional scale to them that are going to inform how infill development or redevelopment or adjacent development may be scaled appropriately to be compatible. So grabbing that language and incorporating neighborhood into those terms, we think helps to kind of introduce this idea and helps to support generally this larger idea of transect zoning that says we have areas of high intensity, lower and lowest intensity uses. Having the neighborhood scale kind of branded and identified within that zoning designation, we feel helps to at least establish some familiarity with some of those key intersections that we want to look at improving. And it also may give us a great kind of springboard for discussing the other elements of things like improving or adding design standards, potentially talking about form-based code, and being able to kind of use that as a foundation point for working off of that language. And then the other piece that we really want to tease out here, which is a smaller detail, but I feel like it's critical for us to know, and especially as a passerby or a resident or a user, is to establish a new education and civic zone. So the big piece with this, and I think the advantage of including this in the future zoning map itself, is really to identify what really exists as kind of community and civic inventory. And what it helps us to understand too is kind of the stretch and kind of the satellite component to all these different civic, institutional, and educational uses. Those always kind of tend to be focal and node points within our development and our land use areas. So I think grabbing that inventory and kind of owning it at the right at the rip, instead of trying to make it fit into something else that it's not, I think it helps us to apply kind of a higher level lens to this to say, okay, where are the opportunities of creating these different and distinct neighborhoods and areas where we're looking to do a little bit more placemaking, and using some of those civic and educational kind of areas as guideposts can be helpful for that discussion. So this was basically the overall principle again, and we're coming at this from a perspective of trying to take this language to hand off to a prospective developer who wants to know what they can apply for. We're looking at being able to have this kind of readily available for individual users if they don't have the benefit of having a helper and kind of interpreting and understanding the zoning language and the zoning map. But I think, and paramount really, is that it's really critical for this map to function for all the people who are really enforcing and applying this map. And so I think where that really comes down to, and it's so critical, is your planning staff, are all the members of your land use boards, your zoning board, your planning board, and your town board, and being able to own this and say, this is the product that we know and understand and can really work in and out of very easily. And so a zoning code is really only as good as it is enforceable. And so I tend to look at things from an enforceability perspective and the implementation perspective. I worked for a decade as a public planner for the town of Malta and town of Ballston. So enforcement and applying these things is really where kind of the rubber hits the road. And I think if we can start applying that philosophy when you're at the inception of the zoning map, I think it will be advantageous for the rest of the process. And then I think that kind of leads right into what we're going to look at, which is the new proposed zoning map, right, Jackie? If you want to switch that slide.
Yeah, Sophia, do you want me to jump to the PDF?
That would be great. Yes, perfect.
All right.
Okay,
Hold
awesome.
on just a moment.
Great.
Let me switch gears here.
Sure.
A little bit.
Great.
All right, hopefully everybody can see this. So this will allow me, all right, can you see this?
Yes.
All right, so this will allow me to zoom in as needed.
Perfect.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, perfect. So again, to kind of reiterate the points of our strategies here, if you can kind of memorize or evoke what the future land use looked like, we really did try to use that as the foundation for redistricting, so to speak. Another priority that was kind of part of our lens and part of our process, but I didn't articulate yet, was also trying to remove the amount of split zone parcels that exist in town, which seems like a kind of a minor detail, but again, removing ambiguity and committing to that process of clarity and transparency from the time of establishing the zoning boundaries, we believe kind of helps to support the remainder of the process going forward and saying, you know, we're designing something that is, again, kind of readily enforceable and clear and applicable. Again, using the same language that was provided with the future land use map for consistency of that process, we see a set of uses, again, agricultural, open space, commercial, mixed use, education, civic, and the rest within the legend applied to the map here. Some of the areas where it differs just a bit, and this is really where, you know, this is one very kind of minor area, but we're going to get into it more. I think as we go forward and we start to kind of look at the details and look at the allocation of these zoning districts, again, that local institutional knowledge will be absolutely invaluable to understanding the reality between this idyllic map and what the real built conditions are and the viability really is for these particular land uses. So one of the first things that we looked at in trying to kind of integrate the second layer of information, again, with the future land use being the first, was the natural resources inventory and understanding really where our more sensitive environmental areas are. We wanted to respond to that. So one of the ways where this map might distinguish itself a little bit differently from the future land use map, and probably where we'll want to sink our teeth into, is especially along our waterfront area. So as Jackie indicated before, within the waterfront industrial area, which is currently branded coastal industrial, we understand that there's a certain degree of built conditions there that we're inheriting, some that might be kind of working in perpetuity, depending on, obviously, the degree to which they're permitted for future right. But taking a realistic approach and wanting to make sure that we account for that, we obviously kept that district there. The one piece where we pulled back a little bit was the extension of the light industrial zone. That's exactly right, Jackie. So knowing that the light industrial area was slated to be proximate to the waterfront industrial area, and also not terribly disparate from the Regeneron area and the UAlbany areas itself, light industrial we kind of chopped back on a little bit for this version of the zoning map. And again, so much of that had to do with the prevalence of wetlands, floodplains, and steep slopes, and the topography of the area that again would kind of falsely promise opportunity where maybe there is not as much opportunity physically and environmentally speaking. So that's one of the areas where it kind of differs significantly in comparison from the land use map. There are other built conditions that we're obviously working within. The PDDs kind of being the largest piece that's kind of an outlier again from the future land use map. Obviously, taking those and knowing that we're inheriting them as part of kind of fixture points or inventory, those remain extant in the proposed zoning map itself. But focusing as we kind of move over towards the east, towards Columbia Turnpike, one of the things that we wanted to do was kind of reflect these distinct existing nodes, and as Jackie had kind of organized them between the primary and secondary activity areas, and trying to mirror and reflect that zoning to support what we would imagine wanting to be the opportunity and maybe some of the proposed uses for those areas. We believe that one of the guiding principles for zoning that can be very helpful is this concept of transect zoning, which creates kind of a phased in and phased out transect of kind of gently increasing and then decreasing intensity of uses and mass. So one of the things that I wanted to be attentive to with the particular, with Columbia Turnpike in particular, was not over zoning the entire turnpike, so that we might be able to kind of better direct pressure and interest to the key intersections that we want to see enhanced and become kind of more solidly footed places, clearly defined places. So what you'll see as you move down the transect, you see the application of the commercial mixed use uses, the neighborhood mixed uses, and you also see the neighborhood residential kind of crossing the turnpike in bands, kind of breaking up some of those areas to try to create relief, and again, kind of a little bit more breadth along the turnpike so that we can focus the attention to the areas where we really need that development to occur, where we really want it to occur, where it's suitable to occur, and then kind of ratchet it down along the way in certain areas to create some relief, and again, help to kind of preserve some of the lower density development that is already existing on Columbia Turnpike. Again, one of the pieces that we wanted to take kind of going up Route 4, we wanted to apply some of this as well. Again, this is really where when we kind of zoom in on these certain neighborhoods, getting that local information is going to be really critical here, but introducing kind of a secondary scale. So while we do have areas of neighborhood mixed use, neighborhood residential along Columbia Turnpike, Route 4 looked like there was an opportunity to introduce and kind of consolidate a little bit more of that going northerly into the northern part of town. So that's what you'll see there as well. And again, we have some areas that are already teased out for education and civic. We may end up populating that layer a little bit more based on what we find in the gaps we plug in. So I believe that we've got another institution up along Troy Road that would theoretically be part of that zoning designation layer as well. And then moving north, trying to accommodate for the combination of really highly intensive highway uses that are in the area, the higher intensity industrial areas that we're seeing more towards the northern and northwestern kind of corners of town. And then obviously wanting to make sure that we accommodate for the existing commercial inventory that the town has too. This is where we get into kind of a little bit more of a cornucopia of uses right now. And that's where we see, especially at Cass Corners, we see the office commercial, we see the light industrial, or excuse me, we don't see light industrial. We see the neighborhood mixed use, and then we see the regional commercial as well. And then obviously taking a cue from the existing zoning map, the future land use map, we wanted to obviously, and understanding that conservation is going to remain a critical mission through this rezoning, wanted to preserve that as well. So you'll see, generally, the eastern third part of your town incorporated into the rural low density residential uses, and agricultural open space use right now designated down in the southwestern corner of the town. There may be an opportunity to integrate that in with the low intensity residential as well. But this was our first pass at creating a draft map that we hoped didn't look grossly unfamiliar from the existing zoning map, but also move towards the direction of the future land use map. And again, just trying to consolidate those zoning districts, which we will have the benefit of spending time looking to define and really kind of envision what those specific areas should incorporate. This was the product that we were leading with, but I believe will be the foundation for our first kind of great discussion with this particular action item. So I'll turn it back to you, Jackie.
Thank you, Sophia.
Sure.
So I want to say that all the panelists are still with us. Thank you very much. There was a lot of information that we just threw at you today. What I'd like to do is to get some of your initial comments, thoughts with regard to this proposed zoning map, the idea of kind of taking those the future land use concepts that were integrated into the comprehensive plan and transitioning those into proposed zoning districts and the consolidation of districts. Really wanted to get some of your initial ideas. And this is intended to be preliminary. We fully expect this will change. That's part of this process, but we do need to start somewhere. And in our experience collectively going through this process, it's always easier to react to something and then have meaningful discussion to be able to move forward. So Sophia highlighted some of the key elements here, identified where there might be some slight variation from the future land use map. I'd like to go ahead and just open it up to the committee at this point. And Toby, it looks like you're raising your hand. So if you would like to go first, please jump in.
Great, thank you. So immediately my initial impression is this is a phenomenal looking zoning map. I like the idea of combining some of the similar zones. I just want to hear a little bit more about the thought process behind combining agricultural and open space into one zoning district, because, well, I know both of those are in nature green. I think that there are some very, very broad differences in the way that they're going to be managed. So I just want to hear a little bit about the idea that you guys had behind that when you combined it.
Sure. I'll take a first stab at that, Sophia, and then you can jump in if that's
No, that's
okay.
perfect. Yes.
So I think the first thing that I do want to point out, Adam, is that even though there's only one district that has agriculture in it, that doesn't necessarily mean that that is the only district that would permit agricultural uses. So I think that that's one thing to kind of distinguish. We will need to go through that process of identifying permitted uses. And I think, you know, there's areas that are identified here as the low density residential area where perhaps that would make sense to have, you know, an allowance of a variety of agricultural uses. That's a conversation that we will need to have. I will say one of the reasons why we combined the agricultural open space, and Sophia can add to this and expand, in this area, and I got rid of my little spotlight, in this area along the waterfront, as you know, a good portion of that is the preserve. And there's also existing ag that's happening in this area. And it's also heavily constrained in this area as well. So we thought that we would, you know, just kind of combine that for ease of use. If we find that doesn't work, that's okay. You know, there are certain times where, even though as a first cut we try to consolidate districts, sometimes it just doesn't necessarily work out. Yeah, Sophia, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
I love that comment because that's absolutely right. And I think I love the idea. That just made me so happy to hear that. You're absolutely right. Agriculture does not equal open space in all applications. Sometimes agriculture might be a little bit more quasi-industrial, depending on the intensity of use, the type of farming it is, whatever it may be. Just to mimic what Jackie said, if this is a place where it doesn't make sense to consolidate them, I think that's a fabulous idea. It's entirely possible that maybe in certain other places, we've seen them identified as land conservation areas that tend to only permit agriculture and usually not even residential. There's a lot of different ways to kind of organize and couch those zoning districts. It might be that agriculture doesn't get teased out as a separate zoning district, but it could be, you know, because it's a right to farm municipality, theoretically speaking, it might be one of those things where we go, well, maybe it's part of an overlay district. Maybe it's part of the agricultural district, or, you know, districts organized by the county, whatever it may be. But maybe this is a great place to split it up. So I think that's a great comment. I think that's something to look more at. And I think, you know, that's a good point too. There's a range to agriculture. So maybe that is the other prompt. You know, maybe crop and pasture and you know, grass or produce-based agriculture might differ from livestock. There might just be other ways that we can kind of organize and think about that. So I've made notes about that. I think that's just a great starting point, and I'm glad that you are enjoying at least the first draft. That's great. Perfect. But no, that's a great point.
Other comments, questions from the committee? This is great. Adam,
Yeah.
thank you for kicking it off. Yeah.
Can I chime in?
Please.
I'd like to see 9 and 20 be a little more uniformly zoned, I guess, to allow more flexibility. You know, we have a lot of tight spots with different zones, which makes things difficult. And I feel like that ends up with a lot of, whether it's a variance or us trying to figure out a way to just make something fit where it, I don't know if I'm explaining this very well, but just have, especially 9 and 20, having more flexibility for the planning board and zoning board and town board. I think that's very helpful, would be more helpful. I do think this was a great first draft. It was fantastic. Why is Janae not an EC district, or is it? Janae School.
So there are, hold on just a minute. There are some that don't have the actual EC label on it because of, honestly, the scale of the map. Did we capture it in any of these other smaller areas?
No, it's going to be down. It's going to be down to your right. It's at the close to the intersection of 9 and 20 and Route 4.
down here. So that could be something that we missed. Yeah.
It looks like NMU or.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
Actually, Jeff, can you circle that again? I'll save the
Yeah, I
the
can't
markup.
help myself. I always draw on Zoom.
No, please, and anyone that wants to annotate, please do. We do save it. Hold on, I'm gonna save that. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, this is why we need multiple sets of eyes on this. So thank you, Matt.
It's one of the thoughts I had on the school districts, and same with the PDDs, and you don't have to answer it now, but I'd like to give some thought to just eliminating them as their own zone. Is, you know, I don't know that a school needs to be its own zone versus should be an allowed use in one of those residential zones or something like that, versus carving them out as their own particular zone. And same with the PDDs, you know, in particular, we can talk about this one down here, which is the Springers PDD. That's fully built out already, is just eliminated off the map as a PDD and just overlay it with what we think it should be, which is, you know, neighborhood mixed use or whatever fits.
So Jeff, that's an interesting concept. I think much easier to do that with regard to the schools and the educational facilities. Quite honestly, I don't know how we would do that for the PDDs because they are their own separate legislation, and I would have concerns about creating non-conforming situations. That is a legal question, quite honestly, that I'd want to run. Yeah, it's an interesting concept because particularly for those that are built out, they are what they are. Integrate those in, that helps to simplify the zoning, certainly.
Yeah. And I think it got back to your original discussion, or Jack brought up the point where we have so much pressure of PDDs, I think twofold. One, there's a feeling that the underlying zoning doesn't fit what they want to do. But I also think it's just become a development tool for the developers to just be a little more creative with what they want to do. You know, we show Regeneron here as a PDD, but that was allowed by use down there. You know, so why it chased the PDD formula, I forget why, but I know Mill Creek needs to still be a PDD and is not built out yet. But same thing, we should have a clarification, and I'm actually asking our zoning attorney for it for tomorrow night's meeting is, I believe once a new zoning map goes into effect, it extinguishes all use variances that predated, that were issued on the prior comprehensive zoning law. So I'm thinking it could be the same way with PDDs. If we issue a new zoning map and change the zoning over the top of the PDD, it would extinguish the PDD, but that's legal.
Okay, yeah, we definitely, that's something I definitely want to consult your town attorney on before doing that. But I do think that that's a really interesting concept that we can certainly explore.
And interesting you brought up, I had on my notes here, you know, we certainly want to address pre-existing non-conforming within the law, right? That's something we deal with a lot.
Okay.
You know, in Hampton Manor or off of Phillips Road, we have a lot of situations there.
And yeah, one word of encouragement is draw the map for what we want the town to be and not worry as much about trying to make the zone fit what's underneath it. There's a lot of choppiness to some of the zones because they're trying to, well, that's an existing retail building, so we need to zone it this way. Well, not necessarily. So, you know,
yeah, I think there was a building like that.
Non-conforming.
There was a building like that off of Phillips Road.
Yeah.
That was OC.
Yeah.
And just, I guess my last point, as far as the mapping accuracy, which nothing against your guys' accuracy. This is just me being, I have a GIS degree. And so it always bothered me that we had PDDs target specifically where like the PDD bled into other parcels, right? And it just became a pain in the neck. And I think we had a few variances for that or had to figure that out.
Okay, so we might need to tap into your knowledge to know if what we have mapped here for the PDDs is accurate. The other thing too is that sometimes the parcel data that we have is may not be the most current and up to date because some things changed, new subdivisions, that sort of thing. So that's also something that just from a kind of a logistical item as we're moving forward, if you guys notice anything like that, because this will be your official zoning map, so it's got to be right and current, let us know. And we'll go ahead and make those adjustments.
And everyone else might think differently. It's just a nuanced thing. It's always.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think it gets back to that clarity piece too for those implementing the zoning, right? Understanding, you know, where those boundaries are.
Mm-hmm.
Other initial thoughts, comments?
I like it. I like the map. But more importantly, I mean, I haven't gotten into it enough to make a true assessment. I like the process. I think this gives us a framework for discussion, and you can hear it already. We're going to have to drill down into every piece of this, but it's a great start, and I think the process is the right process for us to get a handle on this. So I think it's a really good start.
Great.
Hello, this is Jenny Hickson. I had a question about whether this map and proposed zoning, which I also think is a great start, will address the problem that Jack mentioned at the beginning about outrageous applications for PDDs, because
So, pardon me, Jennifer. One thing that we can look at within, pardon me, within your zoning is how your PDD legislation is written, and that process to do that, and you know, making sure that there is that ability for the town board to not accept an application for PDD. You know, it is a legislative act by your town board, and making sure that what is, you know, currently there gives the town board that ability to be able to hear a PDD, you know, consider a PDD application, making sure that you know, those processes are clearly mapped out. We can take a look at that to see if there's anything that needs to be changed. I'm going to throw something out there, and I'm not sure how well received it might be, but we are working in another community that has also experienced a significant number of PDDs in recent years. And the community has basically said enough is enough, and they have removed that as a tool and replaced it with other more flexible zoning that the town hopes meets what the needs are of the developer in those areas where they want to have growth happen, so that there isn't a need to have a PDD as a tool.
Kind of my thought about 9 and 20.
Okay. That's a little, you know, I will say that is a little extreme, because it can be a useful tool if applied appropriately.
Well, Jackie, let me jump in here, because I've had an epiphany on PDDs. And my epiphany is a project has to be a unicorn for it to qualify as a PDD. It has to be something so remarkable that everyone benefits big time from it. The PDD has there's two issues. One is the zoning hasn't been adequate, but let's be honest, the PDD is the insider's guide to doing whatever they damn please. And I'm sorry to say that. The day of the PDD in the town of East Greenbush is almost over. I liked what Jeff said. I think you have to have it as a tool, because I think under the right circumstances, it's a very important tool. But there are parts of that, the way that it's currently structured, that have to change. There's an amenities package, and it gives you, it implies a mathematical formula, but doesn't give you one. All kinds of things have to be cleaned up. But the PDD is a mess. And Adam and I met with somebody who was talking to us about a PDD just recently. And I just said, you do not want to try it with this town board right now. we've had enough. And Tina, tell me if I'm wrong.
If I may jump into as someone who I used to work for the land that had 50 separate PDDs in addition to zoning, so I can completely appreciate how difficult it is. It feels like there's this whole bypass avenue to thwart your zoning mission and your land use mission, right? And so I can completely appreciate that. And I think that one of the things I was just thinking is that, and it's because I don't have the knowledge myself yet, because I'm not a resident, but I would like to look at what the existing PDDs are, what has been pursued by use of a PDD, and see if we can kind of identify and inform how the PDD regulations and the formation process can be informed based on that. I feel like I've dealt with so many PDDs where actually conservation subdivisions or any type of residential development that were seeking density that they just simply couldn't pursue under conventional zoning, and PDDs were the way that they tried to execute that, right? So that's certainly something that we can look at. And as we look at the zoning code itself and the subdivision piece, when we think about things like conservation subdivision as a potential tool, that might be one of those things that we can help to kind of eliminate at least the type of PDD applications you're getting. Because maybe you're saying at the first, maybe we don't want any PDDs, maybe we want to say no more residential PDDs. And maybe there's a way to kind of start introducing those things kind of piece by piece and adjusting that process. But I can completely appreciate the frustration with not having that holistic predictability that you're seeking by creating that guiding document and the zoning code, only to say there's a, it feels like there's a cheat path, when in actuality it should be exactly like you said, a unicorn. Maybe it's a use that just hasn't been defined, that has, maybe hasn't even been contemplated yet. And it might be a combination of uses, or it could be something that affords the town a certain type of public benefit or amenity that might not otherwise be provided to the town, which would be your ideal way of capitalizing on development pressure, which would hopefully kind of return itself back to you. But I completely appreciate the PDD comment, and that's something I could put on my list too, is to just see what are the living PDDs we're working with, and do we see a pattern here?
Sophia, one of my issues with PDDs has been my sense that the zoning map is incorrect. And so once we get it right, because what we said to this guy is hang on for 6 months, see what happens. Because once we get the zoning map right, then the PDD should be hard to get. It should be very carefully defined and quantified. And it should be something of a unicorn. So, and that's important, because right now everybody comes through the door wanting a PDD.
And I think it's been a mix of residential and commercial, right? It's Target, it's 9 and 20. There's a subdivision there.
Okay.
And it's based on age too, because that Springhurst PDD was created 15 years ago, and really is the perfect model for what a PDD should be. Is it steps commercial on the turnpike back into a residential neighborhood in the back as one big development. So, it's, I don't know, would it be your neighborhood mixed use or something like that zone now? So it stepped back from commercial along the highway back into a nice subdivision in the back. So that was 15 years ago. To me, it was a great PDD, and it's probably the best role model we have in the town, versus maybe this one here, which is the library, the Y, and the senior housing, the Eddy in the back, which was just 3 disparate uses stuck on a piece of old farmland that maybe wasn't the best use right out there. So, and then there's some commercial ones like Matt mentioned more recently, that's just more density than is allowed, and that's basically what it was used for.
Yeah, Jeff, I would agree with your assessment of the Springhurst one, because that really functions well with the commercial development on 9 and 20, and promotes a walkable neighborhood.
Yeah.
And you see it. I live in an adjacent neighborhood, so I see it all the time. People taking advantage of pedestrian access to the shops.
And they don't have a pilot.
So it sounds like we will need to have a pretty in-depth conversation about the PDD. And I think our homework, so that we can have an informed conversation about that, is to take a look and see what can be done from a legal perspective moving forward with those existing. Jeff, to your point, take a look at your current PDD legislation, see what might need to be tightened up, refined, reworked a little bit for that. It sounds like I'm hearing keeping it as a tool is still important, but really making sure that as we move forward through this overall process, we get the underlying base zoning right, so that development can occur in the way that, quite honestly, that the town is looking to have it occur without having to go through and utilize another tool like the PDD to get there. All right. So this will be a future topic of conversation. Yeah, future meeting. Excellent. Other initial thoughts based on discussions today, what you see in front of you, what you've had all of like 20 minutes to look at for the first time today.
This is Adam Toby. I just wanted to echo one of Matt's sentiments about what feels like patchworking along 920 of the NMU and the CMUs. One of the things that I'm envisioning is much further down in the future. I can imagine that the commercial mixed use and the neighborhood mixed use are going to have different structural height allowances. And so patchworking them like this may end up, if they develop to the fullest extent, may end up looking a little bit like that patchwork, where a lot of buildings are much higher, much lower than their neighboring buildings because of the way that the zones laid out here.
So Adam and Matt, is it this area primarily that you're really focused on, where kind of part of it in here? Let me zoom in a little bit because it might be helpful. So what we have here, and just for your homework purposes as you're thinking about this, the intent here is to kind of maintain kind of these nodal areas, right? Because it is a really long corridor. And so maintaining the same level of consistent development along that entire corridor is going to be challenging, and it becomes one long strip versus several nodes with a little bit of a different character. This is that placemaking component that we discussed through the comprehensive planning process. So that's kind of why you see kind of the, if you look at a cross section, it's kind of the up and down. So it's the development and then less intense, and then more intense, and then less intense. But the other piece of it that it's hard to see from that other area is that the neighborhood mixed use along this portion of Columbia Turnpike is along the frontage, and that commercial mixed use is in the rear portion of potentially developed areas. So it would be a step, if you will. One of the challenges, and I think this will come up in conversation as we're looking at what is, quote, the right zoning for this area, is that the frontage parcels along Route 20, the Columbia Turnpike, are pretty shallow. And so creating opportunities and the right zoning to provide for that flexibility for redevelopment and development of any of the vacant lands, while recognizing some of the limitations of the actual parcel sizes there. So just a couple of things to think about. Obviously, we can, we'll be talking about this more in terms of what makes the most sense. But from that scale, zoomed back, I think it was hard to see that the intent is along the corridor itself and that frontage to have the same zoning, and then this CMU recognizing some large parcels for potential future growth is why we identified that.
Yeah, I guess like that, we're just south of the lake where that says CMU, that's the pit, right? Why not make it all CMU or all NM? Why not make it one zone?
Like over here, yeah.
Yeah, right there.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe I'm being short-sighted here.
One thing I think an interesting piece of context here that's worth noting is that's directly where the Albany Hudson Electric Trail is now running. So in that area, the AHET would be running through the commercial mixed use, when it almost makes more sense to me to switch the CMU and the NMU, because I'm understanding that parcel size is a limitation here. I get that. But it does make more sense that a trail would be more desirable going through a neighborhood mixed use than a commercial mixed use, for both neighborhood access and people and commercial, not running into any contesting, odors and vibrations and the like for people that are on the trail.
Okay. Okay, great. Other thoughts, comments?
I just have a question about the AO, the agriculture and open space. Are there other areas that, and maybe it's a scale thing, that would qualify for open space? Like, I'm guessing the town park might, just thinking open space, it probably has some kind of criteria where it needs to be in some type of conservation status. I don't know if other parcels would qualify that besides town or county, or some type of preservation or preserved area would qualify.
Yeah, the town park is parkland. It has an official designation, as does Lakeshore Drive around the Hampton Manor Lake. It's a beast of its own.
Yeah.
It's a nice beast. Maybe beast is the wrong metaphor.
So a short answer to your question is that, so yeah, anything that might already be designated parkland or conserved, either outright or through conservation easement, that sort of thing, that's not identified in the zoning map, because that is kind of, deed restrictions, if you will, in terms of the property. So the zoning is kind of on top of that. And, those would be able to continue to happen, because we would not be looking to shape future uses and identify permitted uses on those properties, because they're kind of already shaped, if for lack of a better word. So that's the short answer to your question. The other portion to your question is that we still need to define, kind of what this agriculture open space is. And so I think that's going to be a future conversation that we have with you, is how do we define that? At this point in time, there are no other areas that are identified in this preliminary draft map. If there are areas that we should be considering, let's have that conversation. So hopefully that somewhat answers your question, Jennifer. Yeah. Okay. Other thoughts, comments on the initial draft?
Hey,
Well,
Jackie, I'm assuming are you going to provide this draft map to us and we can digest it a
Yes.
little? Cool.
Yes. That was an excellent segue, Jeff. Thank you very much. I did not plant him in the audience here, folks. So
Nice.
what we will do following this evening, so it'll be tomorrow, we will share a PDF of this draft map. Keep in mind, this is a preliminary draft, and this is a working draft for the committee. We'll share this with you. We'll also share with you the section of the comp plan that describes in a little more detail what the future land uses were that have now been transitioned into possible zoning districts. So you get a little better sense of what the overall purpose might be when we develop the purpose of the zoning district for the zoning update, and go from there. And what we would like to do is to ask you to give us your feedback, via email. And, we're going to, as part of our next steps, identify a time frame, probably within 2 to 3 weeks, so that we can get that back, try to consolidate all of that feedback and provide a revised version of this that we can talk about the next time we're together. So that's kind of where we are at this point. I'm going to jump back into the PowerPoint, possibly, if I get that right. Here we go. I think it's this one. Excellent. And I'm also keeping track of the time. I know that we've been together for over an hour and a half now. And so I know we're not going to get too much into this, but this is also going to be homework for you. And maybe we can have just kind of an initial conversation about this over the next few minutes. But we do want to start focusing on definitions as well. This is something that we will continuously be working to update as we go through this process. But we find when we're working with communities going through a zoning update, there is there are 1 or 2, maybe more uses that continuously come up that don't have good definitions or are not defined. They might be uses that weren't contemplated in 2008 when your zoning, your current zoning was updated. Some of the things that we're seeing now, things like, farm breweries and, more expensive farm stands and, things like this really just weren't contemplated back at the time when your zoning was last wholly updated. So we wanted to understand from you, what definitions are missing. What are some of the common issues that you see over and over and over again, with regard to definitions, whether it's from an implementation, a challenge from interpretation, or just something you think needs to be refined. Anything that's popping into your mind right now. And then this would also be homework that we would ask you to think about and provide, a list to us, and then we'll start to tackle that. But any initial thoughts in terms of, common issues with regard to definitions? And yes, this is the level of detail we're getting into. Okay.
Jackie, I will have a list I'll provide separately. I don't want to bore everybody because we've gone through a bunch. But one question maybe for you or Adam is, this is probably a great section for our code enforcement officer to weigh in on also, because I think he gets a lot of the brunt of this question.
Okay, great. So this will be homework for you, and Jeff, thank you. And yeah, Adam and Anna will circle back with you, and I think probably having an internal staff conversation makes a lot of sense moving forward. So here are
side yard.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
No, front yard versus side yard.
Got it.
Variances about sheds or pools. Jeff knows better than I do, but.
Yeah, and residential houses turned sideways on lots with 2 front yards. So how many rear yards do you have versus side yards versus,
okay.
Yeah. Corner lots have created quite a bit of consternation.
Okay, we will take I have some, I have to take a look at the definition, but I do have some ideas about how to make that a little bit easier, because they do tend to be challenging.
Yeah, especially when you wind up with your gutters running onto the neighbor's yard because the house is backed up to the side yard. So we can give you some photos.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So
that's Jeff's homework, by the way, not mine.
All right. So next steps for you, we've talked about reviewing the proposed preliminary draft zoning map and districts, as well as any definitions. As you're reviewing that zoning map, it would also be helpful, given our conversation about the PDD tonight, if there are certain areas where there might be more problematic and that you deal with more frequently, help us highlight those areas as well, because that might help us to shape some of our conversations together in terms of the committee work. We threw a calendar date on here of having you get that information with regarding to any identification of definitions and the zoning draft information back by February 11th. That's about 3 weeks. This is assuming we would be looking at getting back together the end of February, possibly early March, to be able to have you get us that information, give us time to refine that information and get it back to you before we come together again, so that we can just dive right into the conversation. I wanted to get a sense of, I'm looking at the calendar right now, is that a reasonable amount of time for the group to be able to dive into this and get us some feedback? I'm seeing some head nods. Okay.
Yeah, that's good. That's good for me. I mean, I think that the sooner the better. Right?
Okay. All right. I'm seeing head nods. If you didn't speak up or nod your head, you're stuck with it. How's that? Sorry.
I think there, maybe there's developers out there waiting. I'm sure there are, waiting for an update on the zoning law.
Okay, excellent. And I do want to point out, as you're going through this, if you have questions or anything like that, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're here to support you through this. So, don't hesitate to reach out. Other things that we wanted to bring to your attention, we will be looking and asking for a discussion about key area and bulk table changes. Ultimately, we will dive into that in detail once we have settled collectively on the proposed zoning districts and the proposed map. But it would be helpful for us, and we'll talk about this at our next meeting, to have a sense of some of the key issues that you're seeing over and over, and some of the challenges, and if there are ways that we can address that as we're preparing your new area and bulk tables. We'd like to know that up front. I did mention we will be having a website dedicated to this zoning update. That is in the works right now. That will hopefully be done within the next 2 weeks. So we will share that with the committee when it's done. And Adam and Anna, I think maybe we can do a press release or something like that to let the public know that this is available. All right, so once again, our second advisory committee meeting, we are thinking of having these monthly. And I think we can probably, moving forward, Adam, do you think we should do a doodle poll to kind of find out what evening works best for, for everybody, and kind of do that offline, and then provide hopefully more advanced notice in terms of what the format and platform might be?
Yeah, if there are, this is the CAC's meeting time slot each month. So starting with this slot probably isn't the best way to go, but if there are, maybe while we're here, it might make sense to at least canvass the group just quickly before we pop off.
Sure.
It's probably not Tuesdays or Wednesdays. Monday night might be the best bet if we just shift 2 weeks to avoid CAC.
Yeah, the CAC is the fourth Monday. Is that right? Is that what we're at? And so it'd be.
Yeah, Mondays work well for me.
So what about the second Monday? Just kind of throwing that out there. Or the first Monday of the month.
Maybe I'm thinking of the town board and other meeting cycles too. I'm thinking first Monday, or probably the first Monday.
First Monday works for me.
First Monday.
Works for me.
I think, wow, that doesn't usually work that easily. I'm hearing first Monday, going once, going twice.
And what is that date?
So the next first Monday would
March 7th?
Yes, because we will not be ready by February 7th. I can that might be a little tight.
So March 7th?
So it looks like March 7th. And does the 7 p.m. timeframe work for folks?
Sure.
I'm not
Yeah,
hearing
Jack-
any objections.
Jackie, what is the plan in terms of, I just see there's a fair amount of comments and for
Mhm.
Q&A and trying to be fair to everybody involved. I suspect there's at least an hour's worth of discussion just in the Q&A. Is there any consideration to maybe starting a little bit earlier, or would we just drag this conversation on until 10 o'clock if there's that number of comments? I'm fine with later. I was just curious what the plan was for addressing those comments moving forward.
Yes. So once we have settled on this meeting, we will be addressing those comments as best we can. Although my review of these are that they're kind of identifying all the things that we will be doing moving forward. So we don't have answers to a lot of the comments that have been put in the Q&A right now. But we can be flexible, whatever time works. If 6 o'clock, starting on the earlier side, at 5 o'clock, whatever works best for this group from a work session perspective, as well as the public that might want to listen in.
Time slot was fine. I just didn't know if we were going to incorporate a discussion for all those comments into like the end of the meeting or something like that, but the time slot's fine also.
Okay.
I think that's a fair point. You're probably getting more feedback, right? I mean, should we do like 6 o'clock? Unless people think differently.
6 o'clock is fine.
I'd suggest 6:30, 6 o'clock. Some of us might show up at the meeting hangry.
We don't want that. Okay, so March 7th at 6:30 will be our next committee meeting. The platform to be determined. It would be great if we could all be in a room safely together, but we recognize that that's a long ways away. Things change on a very frequent basis. So we'll try to have that decision about whether or not this is virtual or in person sooner next time, and we'll go from there. And we will be providing, our goal is to provide information a week in advance to the committee so that you have some time to digest the information and we can come together. Okay.
Just a quick question for, well, maybe, I don't know if it's a quick question, but the CAC involvement, the Conservation Advisory Council, it's uncertain how we'll go forward with the involvement in the zoning committee. And, should we, we can certainly discuss this at our council meetings each month. Like it's kind of positioned nicely that it happens right, the week before typically this meeting's going to occur. Yeah. Can we select someone that, we know what topics are coming up for that month's call, or hopefully in-person discussion, someone from the council who has availability that day and has maybe a deep interest in that particular topic for that meeting goes. But I don't know, have you all thought about the ideal situation for the CAC involvement? And also knowing that, not every component of the zoning updates will necessarily involve us, but we certainly, appreciate having a voice at the table and, in spots where conservation concerns are brought up. We'd love to provide input.
Yeah, I think, Jennifer, I think a lot of it has to do with what you guys want to do. There, probably if you could rotate, you might find as we go forward that somebody takes a specific interest in it and wants to go to more than one meeting. But what we want is a representative of the CAC at every meeting, someone who can bring that conversation back to the council and share it with the members. And then you guys tease out the implications and let us know if there's anything that we need to know. But I think it's up to you guys. What we did as a board was just impanel any one of you to attend any one of the meetings. So however you want to work it out, it's up to you.
Okay,
we'd love to have at least one of you every time.
Great. Well, like I said, we really appreciate having a voice at the table, and we'll add it to our business meeting discussion later this week.
Okay, thanks, Jen.
Thank you. Okay, if everyone's okay, I would like to get over to the Q&A piece right now. And I see that folks have figured out how to add comments into the Q&A. And there are a lot we have 17 different comments right now. So I'm going to go through those as quickly as I can. And then we do have a raised hand. All right. So just in case you haven't added into your Q&A, you can utilize the Q&A function. You can also use the raise hand feature, and we'll let you in and you can speak and ask your question. And then if you are on the phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand, and then *6 to mute to unmute. Okay, so I'm just going to go in order that the Q&A questions, and there's 18 now, were asked. And I do want to say that several of these questions are things that we do not have answers to yet. These are the things that this committee is tasked with doing and evaluating as we move forward. So I do want to thank you for your comments, but many of these we simply don't have the answer to yet. So I just wanted to point that out. This is our first meeting. There is a question about, will the old zoning law versions be kept and available to the public? If available, if so, how long? If rulings and decisions are based upon prior zoning laws, shouldn't they be available in the public domain? I believe that would be a town question, but I believe the answer to that would be yes. That would be, they would be available.
The answer would be, of course.
Okay. Excellent. The next comment question, David Turpening visited the East Greenbush Library today and noticed pictures of natural resources hung in the vestibule. Most are of the eastern part of town. How will the new zoning law protect the western part of town, especially residential properties on 9 and 20 from overly commercial development? I think you started to hear some of the conversations that we were talking about with the future, with the proposed future zoning map. And I think that is will be an ongoing discussion in terms of the 9 and 20 corridor. With regard to the western part of town, some of what is being proposed in terms of future zoning districts in that area, I'm going to say east of River Road, kind of up on the hill as rural. That's one example of trying to recognize the natural resources in areas of the western part of town and trying to incorporate that into the new zoning. So hopefully that addresses that. The next question is, will there be statistics regarding how many people attend these meetings and those that follow? Short answer to that is yes, there will be, in addition to the recording that will be posted for now on the town website, but eventually on the project website when that is up and running, there will be a meeting summary. And in that meeting summary, we will identify how many are participating. Next up, what type of documentation will be posted? Here, I'm going to put this over here. Will be posted to the Town of East Greenbush Zoning Advisory Committee section of the town website. Short answer to that is once the project website is up and running, there will be a link on that page that'll take you directly to the project website that will have all of the available information for public when it is ready for public review. So for example, when there is a draft zoning map that has been discussed and there's consensus by the committee, that will be posted for public review. The meeting summaries will be posted for public review, for example. Next question is, what will be the method of notifying individual property owners their property will be rezoned? This process will follow town law for notifications with regard to zoning amendments. Next question, where on the draft zoning map where affordable housing is envisioned to be built? That's a conversation that we will be having. Number one, varying types of housing and where those various types of housing may be permitted. Whether it's accessible structure, or I'm sorry, an accessory structure, whether it's apartments, whether it's single family. We will be talking about the permitted uses, and it is a use with regard to housing and the types of housing. That is a discussion that we will be having collectively once we have established the zoning districts. Question, will there be a more detailed proposed zoning map with street level overview of where zoning boundaries lie? Short answer, yes. While you couldn't see it at the scale that we had the zoning map now, there are parcel boundaries on that map that do include that. Next up, and thank you, Andres, for helping to keep us moving through all of this. When the town of East, this is interesting. When will the town of East Greenbush become the city of East Greenbush? I might turn that over to the supervisor.
Yeah, not while I'm here. No, that's an interesting question. And sometimes it gets very frustrating when the city of Rensselaer gets $1 million grant from the state and we get 73,000 because we're a town. That kind of stuff is tough. But what's involved, this is a town. This is a town. That's kind of what we're trying to conserve.
Thank you, Supervisor. Okay, next up, how will the rezoning affect the Rensselaer IDA prospects currently and in the future? I will say this, and this part of this is a legal discussion, but until the zoning has changed, the current zoning is the current zoning, and that is the law of the land, so to speak. Once this zoning has been amended, if there are changes in terms of permitted uses, etc., any future development would have to abide by that. Unless there is something within the pre-existing non-conforming section that we talk about if it's an existing a use, for example. All right, and so I do want to thank Mr. Turpening because those were all of his comments. So I appreciate that he is as engaged as he is. So thank you for that. Moving on, Tyler Culberson has a handful of comments as well. How can we align the updated map highlighting higher density along corridors with existing infrastructure? For example, Hayes Road and Phillips Road. I'm not sure I understand what that question is, but if it's kind of matching the allowance through future zoning with higher density and making sure that the infrastructure exists to support that, that's certainly a conversation that we need to have on whether or not if infrastructure needs to be expanded to a certain area, if that's something the town wants to think about, or if they don't want to expand it to a certain area, then maybe higher density is not appropriate for potential zoning districts there. So I think discussions that we definitely would need to have. Next up, how can we encourage redevelopment assemblage of some of the smaller parcels on Columbia Turnpike? This corridor needs to be a focal point, and many of these parcels have inconsistent zoning with current market demands, but lack the size for a PDD. I think that you've actually hit one of the biggest challenges right on the head with regard to redevelopment of the Turnpike, and that is some of those smaller parcels. One of the things that the discussions through the comprehensive planning process was to consider more flexible zoning that can be more reactive to the current market demands while still meeting that vision that the town has for the corridor of kind of more compact walkable nodes that perhaps could be more accommodating to some of the redevelopment options there. That's an initial thought. I do think that that's that needs to be an ongoing conversation, and perhaps that could be a focus of a smaller focus group discussion about what could happen along Columbia Turnpike. I don't know if anybody else wanted to add anything to that particular conversation. Okay. Next up, one use that has been historically a non-permitted use in the B1 district is drive-throughs. How can we include that use specifically in future permitted uses with the potential for additional building design and enhancements? I think that's something we can add to the list to have a conversation about. Focusing on current and potential future market demands, oftentimes zoning codes focus on historically active trends and not ones that move into the future. For example, how will e-commerce impact big box retail, and those zoning constraints. Focusing on local retail along the entire Columbia Turnpike corridor may not be realistic considering the historic occupancy rates. Definitely something that I think we hope to be able to integrate into the conversation. I do know in the comprehensive plan, there was some discussion about this very issue, recognizing, especially over the course of the last 2 years, how much e-commerce has emerged. And so there is some direction in the comprehensive plan to think about this. And so this certainly will be an item that we will be discussing. And quite honestly, this is kind of one of those things where maybe the definitions have to be updated too, to integrate in this whole concept of e-commerce, and that really definitely didn't have have the presence that it does now back in 2008. So thank you to Tyler. Moving on, Libby Riley, how would changing the east side of 9J or River Road to AO impact the existing businesses already there? Great question. I think that would be something that we would talk about when we get to what's called the pre-existing non-conforming uses. So identifying how those uses could continue should that be the direction that the town wants to go. So there is a portion of the zoning where we can talk about that, but I don't have the answer to that tonight. Another comment from question another question from Tyler. I've had numerous requests from food truck operators to look to locate in the Columbia Turnpike corridor. Keep this use in mind for future permitting uses would be beneficial. Okay. I beg to differ with comments that were made that the topics discussed tonight are boring or sleep inducing. There's a lot of apathy amongst the town board. Is it an awareness issue? Okay, thank you, David.
Excuse me, wait a minute. There's a lot of apathy among the town or the town board?
It says amongst the population in TOEG. So I'm assuming that's the town of East Greenbush.
Okay, okay. Just so long as, I thought you said the town board, and I was going to take issue with that.
That's not how I read the comment.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, you know, one initial comment to that, David, is hopefully once we get going and, you know, we have a more consistent, well, we have a consistent time to meet, folks will start to pay attention a little bit more to this. And when there's you know, discussions that they can listen to later through the recordings and provide comment, hopefully folks will start to pay a little more attention. But we honestly, we're just kicking this off and haven't had a chance to really communicate with the community yet. And then there's a question about will Becker's Farm be a target for rezoning? I think that at this point we're looking at everything, but you know, we don't know what that might be at this point in time.
Jackie, what is that? Again, it must be getting late. I must be getting grouchy, but what was that comment again?
A question of will Becker's Farm be rezoned?
We're not targeting any, targeting is the wrong word.
Yeah.
Right? Well, God, Becker's Farm, could you imagine targeting them in any sense of the word? My goodness.
And I think, you know, Jack, to your point, I think a clarification is even if a zoning district might change, it doesn't necessarily mean that all the permitted uses that are currently allowed and permitted are going to change, right? It's a multiple step process. There's identifying the zoning district, then there's identifying the uses that are allowed in that district, and then there's identifying the area in bulk, which is kind of how things are placed within that district. And so there's multiple steps there. So at this point, I would like to shift over to the very, very patient Sarah Lance, who has had her hand raised virtually for quite some time as we've gone through all of these all of these comments. And so Andres, can you go ahead and let Sarah Land in, and she can ask her question, please?
Hello, my name is Sarah Lant. I reside at 8 Cedar Crest Drive. I moved here in 2015. My home is along 3rd Avenue Extension across from the rural cemetery. If you remember the car that crashed into a shed and pool a few years ago, hello, that's me. In fact, this experience is part of the reason I'd like to share my comments with you about the planned development districts tonight. I am concerned about increased development in the 3rd Avenue Extension corridor. It is a state route that connects downtown Rensselaer and 787 with Route 4 and major shopping plazas alongside, so key activity centers in both directions. Many drivers travel at a high rate of speed along this corridor, as well as many pedestrians and those traveling by bus route. On December 15th, the town board approved a mitigation measure to accommodate increased traffic from the Regeneron project and is consistent with recommendations outlined in the town's comprehensive plan of 2021. This project is a road and traffic light that will be across from Cedar Crest Drive, right where the rural cemetery entrance is. I would like to note that the major desire and recommendation from the town's 2021 comprehensive plan was to not become a Regeneron town. I am in favor of this traffic light as I feel it will improve safety for pedestrians, traffic, and those visiting their loved ones at the same cemetery. Regeneron has made incredible efforts to improve the health and quality of life for many patients around the world with their life-saving treatments. Along with their efforts to increase well-being, they also have had a steady share price in the stock market. I encourage our town to grow, and I am thrilled that groundbreaking medical science is happening in our community. I would like to see increased walkability and safety as a priority concern for the zoning team as we move forward. I urge the town to consider requiring professional development districts to consider the public and include lighted, separated multi-use paths in zoning considerations, especially along major corridors, which would improve the health and quality of life for all. As noted by many members of this meeting tonight, as well as mentioned by Supervisor Conway and the zoning team, conservation is important to the town and the public interest. Requiring open space and multi-use paths accessible to the public in future development is very important. I encourage the future professional development district developers to line their roads with multi-use paths instead of their pockets. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Great comments.
And Sarah, thank you for your patience. I know there were a lot of Q&As to get through, so thank you for your patience. Okay, we have 2 additional comments in the Q&A, and then I think we are going to wrap up what I would say a very full first meeting with the zoning. So our next comment is a rephrasing by Mr. Turpinning. Should I have said considered to be rezoned? To your point, Jack.
Well, it's better language than targeted, but again, I think it's the same point. You know, that we're not going to go after like businesses or sites, or I could be wrong. I just don't see it. Okay. Certainly not going to destroy a community institution like Becker's Farm.
Okay. And the last comment, actually, this is a great way to end. So thank you, Tyler. Great presentation, MJ Engineering team. So we'll end on a positive note. Yeah. Thank you very much, Tyler. Appreciate that. And I want to say thank you to the committee. There was a lot to get through tonight. And there's a lot of heavy information that we just tossed your way. And we look forward to, oh, hold on, I lost my audio. Sorry, is that better? Okay, we look forward to speaking with you in March.
You got it.
All right, thanks everybody.
Good night.
And leave your
Thanks,
office.
Jackie. Thank you.